So just a few words about the mighty Quinn, and that is she started the poetry series at Alfred A. Knopf, otherwise known as Alfred A. Gesundheit, and she published a lot of important poets there and established, I mean, really, Alice, you know, you've probably done more for poetry in the past 50 years than anyone who, except people who are poets themselves. That's my pronouncement.
It's true. It's an accurate statement.
And then Alice was abducted to the New Yorker and became the poetry editor there. You were hired as a fiction editor, if that's correct. And then you worked there for many a decade. Wow.
How long?
2 decades.
How long?
20 years.
20 years at the New York.
And then Alice went to become the head of the Poetry Society, where you were there for 18 years. Is that correct? She was the head of the Poetry Society.
Fortunately, there's a little overlap. Otherwise,
And Alice is a nonagenarian, and you'd never know it. And anyway, Alice did, you know, the programs that she did at the Botanical Gardens, Poetry in Motion, which was a lifesaver for so many people, including me, when you're on the subway and all you want to do is disassociate, and your eyes come down and there's, you know, 8 lines of beautiful poetry. We have Alice Quinn to thank for that.
some part of it.
So tonight we're going to do something very interesting. We're going to discuss 4 poems of Elizabeth Bishop, probably the most important poet of the latter half of the 20th century, and I think probably has become more important in this century. But you can tell me I'm wrong about that. And you know, and I'll just say a couple of other things in terms of reading an interview with Elizabeth Bishop in the Paris Review. She is so completely likable, and she's such a real person. And one of the things I like the best is when she was quoting somebody who had interviewed her, because the interviewer said, well, you seem shy about being interviewed. And she said, well, I was interviewed, and he said whatever. And then she said, he made me sound like a dumbbell. And I thought, you know, that's a real person. And that comes through in her poetry. And it also comes through in, you know, Marianne Moore's poetry, and they were great pals. So without further, as they say, ado, let us talk with Alice. And why don't we start, Alice, why don't you say a few words about Elizabeth Bishop and your book, which Alice also published, which was Elizabeth Bishop's writing that hadn't been published, and Alice did the notes for it.
That book was a little bit controversial because I was asked to do it by Bob Giroux, who was Bishop's lifelong editor. But Bishop had published 100 kind of perfect poems. So publishing the poems that she had not finished, the drafts, it was a little controversial, but there were so many notebooks and letters, and I could contextualize these drafts and unfinished poems biographically. And this was before the spate of, it was 20 years ago. So since then, Vic and Foster, there have been at least, what would you say, Liz? At least 10 books about Elizabeth Bishop. She is probably the most internationally beloved American poet.
But when this book was published, it was, I remember, because I got it before Alice and I called you to say, it's on the front page of the Times Book Review.
It was an event.
And I just want to read, Alice would never do this because it's not appropriate, but I just want to read a little bit of that review and then we can commence. Where it was by David Orr, New York Times Book Review, cover review. And it says that she worked, Elizabeth Bishop, in one of our country's least popular fields, poetry, doesn't matter. That she was a woman, doesn't matter. That she was gay doesn't matter. That she was an alcoholic, an expatriate, and essentially an orphan, none of this matters. What matters is that she left behind a body of work that, is it reaches or teaches? Wait a minute. That teaches us, as Calvino once said of literature generally, quote, a method subtle and flexible enough to be the same thing as an absence of any method whatever, end quote. The publication of Edgar Allan Poe in the Juke-Box, which gathers for the first time Bishop's unpublished material, isn't just a significant event in our poetry. It's part of a continuing alteration in the scale of American life. Quinn's notes throughout are superb. This is the devoted editing this material needed and deserved. So, Alice.
Those words.
Alice, you're on something now.
Yes, I'm rounding the bend with her journals and notebooks. And there are 3 sets of significant letters in the book too, because when she traveled, she considered her letters to her partner, her Brazilian partner, her travel journals. And so she traveled on the Amazon, and those letters to Lota are included. And she traveled to England in the 60s, and her letters to Lota are included. And I'm considering, although a scholar friend of mine says, every time we speak, Alice, this book is getting bigger. I'm considering publishing some poems that she wrote in her teenage years to a girl she fell in love with at camp, because that girl was 3 years older and went to Radcliffe and was very literary. And it's the most meticulous, exhilarating record of her high school reading. You know, and she was a very famous student. When she got to sailing camp, a woman named Franny Blau-Muser, who became a lifelong friend, said she came to camp and she created plays overnight, she wrote poems and she wrote songs, and we all knew without any doubt whatsoever that she was a genius, and she was 14. And all the young fellow students at Walnut Hill private school and later at Vassar said the same thing, that she was a thing apart. I would never have read Dostoevsky without her. I would never have read Shelley without her. She was a magnetic, she was a somewhat withdrawn person because, she, as you mentioned, she was orphaned when she was young. But
She had a tragic childhood.
She did.
Talk a little bit about her childhood, because
her little picture, her picture out. You know, somebody has done a concordance of Elizabeth Bishop's poetry, where you kind of list the mention of every single word, and the word little appears in about 110, almost every poem of hers, the word little. And childhood, she felt, was the most important part of a poet's life. So what happened to her was her father was an executive at his father's construction company in Worcester, Massachusetts. And they built scads of parochial schools. They built Clark University. They built the public library in Boston. They were, her grandfather was from Prince Edward Island, so she was really 3/4 Canadian, because her mother was completely Canadian, but her father's mother was old New England stock. So anyway, he had a kidney ailment that was called Bright's disease, and a lot of people died of that in the Civil War years and in Emily Dickinson's lifetime too. And he met her mother when she was a nurse at the Boston hospital, but he died when she was 8 months old. And Bishop's mother, who had a history of nervous collapse, I'm not sure his family knew about that, was absolutely traumatized by grief. And she went and took the little 8-month child back to Nova Scotia, to this little village, great village it's called, but it's a little village. And they're modest endearing house is now a writer's residence. It's next to the Presbyterian Church, across from the Baptist Church. And this is Elizabeth at age 4. And I wanted to read just a short paragraph from her memoir called The Country Mouse, because she was very happy in Nova Scotia. And her mother's people were very literary. They,
But wait a minute, Al, she was living with her grandparents.
She was living with her grandparents, but her grandparents and her aunts and her mother all had kind of a literary society. And one winter they would read Longfellow. The next winter they would read Ruskin. I mean, and she was completely literary and memorizing poems from a very early age. But she went to a one-room schoolhouse, and then when she was 7 years old, her fairly well-to-do, almost rich grandparents from Worcester, from the construction company, came to take her away and bring her back to Worcester because they were afraid of this immersion in poor rural life.
But she lost her mother when she was 5. Her mother was committed.
Her mother was committed when she was 5.
And she never saw her mother again.
Never saw her again. Her mother was institutionalized for 18 years.
And she never once saw her?
No, she didn't see her.
But that's cruel of the relatives, isn't it?
She was,
Too late now.
it was her job to take a package of goodies and of books to the post office every week. And she has a marvelous story about that you should all look up, called In the Village. And she's carrying the package and hiding the label of the Dartmouth Sanatorium in case anybody sees her on her way. And she darts into the blacksmith's shop and takes comfort from him. And it's a miraculous story, and it gives you, it summons up a scene where her mother is still wearing black and purple 3 and 4 years after her husband died. And the seamstress is trying to make the transition from black to purple, and her mother completely loses it. And she became a little violent, and they had to put her away. And as Bishop said in several letters, in those days, if you didn't cure yourself, you were just left there. In America, I think in England at that time, sanatoriums were more humane.
No, they were terrible.
Well, some of them, Oliver Sacks wrote a wonderful piece in the New York Review about some of the wonderful ones in the 19th century. This is, another century, but.
Well, Dorothy Day was the person who
Yes.
was the great crusader, but that's another story.
Well, anyway, so the Bishop relatives came and captured her when she was 7. Her mother, as Foster said, was by then institutionalized 2 years. And she wrote this wonderful memoir called The Country Mouse, and this is a passage that will describe what happened. I had been brought back unconsulted and against my wishes to the house my father had been born in, to be saved from a life of poverty and provincialism, bare feet, suet puddings, unsanitary school slates, perhaps even from the inverted R's of my mother's family. With this surprising extra set of grandparents, until a few weeks ago no more than names, a new life was about to begin. It was a day that seemed to include months in it, or even years, a whole unknown past I was made to feel I should have known about, and a strange, unpredictable future. So she was not happy in this gloomy Victorian farmhouse. Her grandmother was not a great mother. A lot of her own children had died young, and Bishop said she felt kind of on the same footing as Beppo, the family dog. And she would kind of go under the tables with the tablecloths and kind of hide and read and play with the dog. And she developed eczema, she developed asthma, And finally, her grandfather, who was a very sweet man, said to his wife, she's got to go somewhere else. And they brought her.
She was so much trouble?
No, she was so sick. And she was full of anxiety and misery. She was miserable.
You can understand it.
Yeah. And so they took her to her aunt, Maud's, who lived in Revere. Does anyone know Revere? It's an amusement park, seaside town, kind of run down.
Revere figures in Barbara Stanwyck, Volume 1.
That's great. And her aunt and her Uncle George, who wasn't that nice, lived in a second.
Very mildly.
Yeah, second floor of a.
There's more to that story.
Yeah, but we didn't learn that for many, many years, and she didn't talk about it for.
Well, there is this quote. Later, I put together some quotes, and there is this quote that she says, "But my relationship with my relatives, I was always a sort of a guest, and I think I've always felt like that."
Yeah, she did feel like that.
And that marks her experience,
Yeah.
don't you think, with everything?
Well, she didn't go to school until she was almost 14 because she was so sick. When they brought her to her aunt's, she had to be carried up the stairs. And her aunt just kept bringing her poetry and fairy tales, and all she did was read. And in fact, all of her life, she said, my childhood was reading and thinking. That's what it was.
But her aunt understood and just kept feeding her this.
She did, and Bishop she loved her very deeply, but there were two sides to that. She was also a very witty, critical person. She had had a lot of solitude, a lot of time to hone her own thinking and her own perspective, and she was very sure of her own tastes. So this was a description of Maud. She basically said, I'm sure what saved me from being a complete wreck was my one aunt who loved me so much. Bishop wrote later in life, and her notebooks abound with intimate references to her guardian, often comedic. An example from her early Key West days in 1937 when she's 26. I had a letter from Aunt Maud, mostly about cutting her toenails. It is very hard to do it while wearing bifocal glasses, but she managed to finish 7 before Uncle arrived home for lunch. So there's that total appreciation and gratitude.
And realness. And realness.
It's very real, yeah. And actually her aunt and uncle moved to Key West when she moved to Key West, and they were all there together until Aunt Maud died. And Bishop was happy with that. I think she, later on, as Foster is bringing up, she acknowledged that her uncle had touched her inappropriately, but she didn't acknowledge that for a very long time. She wrote that in a letter to her psychiatrist. She never wrote it to anybody else.
But she must have acknowledged it to herself.
Yes.
I mean, wasn't she extremely self-aware?
Yes, she was.
She had to be to survive, right?
Yeah. And
with all of that reading, she was, of course, a very nuanced mind.
When she got to Vassar, her college papers were so stupendously brilliant that they were published in the New York Sun and reviewed in the New York Sun. She had a wonderful piece on timing in Gerard Manley Hopkins' poetry, and the metaphor that stands out to me is she says, because she was from Revere, so she reaches into the amusement park and says, when you're trying to shoot that clay pigeon, it's about timing in poetry and in his poetry, you have to go far enough ahead so that the timing is just right where the clay pigeon is coming here. And if you're lucky enough to bring down your poem and to finish it, your timing will have been correct. But it's such an interesting metaphor, and again, it's so humble but so accurate.
So Alice, let's talk about this poem, Sestina.
Well, when she got to Brazil, she took a trip to Brazil when she was just 40 years old. And she had known a Brazilian woman, aristocratic woman named Lota de Macedo Soares. She'd known her for 10 years. And Lota was a self-taught urban planner and architect, and she had studied painting with Portinari, and she knew everyone in the Museum of Modern Art. She knew Golden Fizdale, the duo pianists. She was super sophisticated and loved, loved, loved New York City. So she,
There's the picture.
that's a picture of Lota.
And there they are together.
So Bishop took a trip to Brazil, and she was going to keep going around the Cape and all around the continent, but she ate some fruit from the cashew fruit. She ate the nut of the cashew fruit, and her face blew up, and she had to be hospitalized. And Brazilians, apparently, according to Bishop, absolutely love to go to the hospital, and they're exuberant visiting people. And she had never felt so attended to, Foster, in her life, as these hordes of people coming in and fussing over her. And it was weeks before she recovered, and by then Lota had fallen in love with her and said, "If you stay with me, I'll build a writing studio." And Lota was at that time designing and building because she was self-taught. She didn't have a degree, so she had to have a collaborator, and her collaborator was Sergio Bernardes, who was very famous, but he kept losing his temper with her because she knew what she wanted, and he'd say, "Oh, this woman, she's changed her mind again about the dining room." He was really ready to kill her. But go back to the house if you can. You can see how gorgeous it is. It was built into the side of the mountain in Petrópolis, about 45 minutes from Rio. That's Bishop with her cat Tobias. And she had 15 pretty wonderful years with Bishop, with Lota, I mean.
Was this the first woman she was with?
No. Her first major love after the youthful crushes was Louise Crane, who was the Crane paper family, which, it is the beautiful paper, but they also make the paper for the dollar bill. So Louise lived in a Fifth Avenue apartment. Her mother had the front 6 lavish rooms, and she had the back 6 rooms. And she was an impresario who loved jazz and had a crush on Billie Holiday, and she has a wonderful, sometimes wonderful appearance in Billie Holiday's autobiography. But she was...
Where did they meet?
They met in the clubs in the Village and up in Harlem. And she had a lot of black women singers whom she adored, and she brought them to the Museum of Modern Art for concerts, and she was very talented.
Given how isolated she was as a child, I was impressed that she was obviously open to relationships. A Bishop, and women were drawn to her, and she was available.
She was very pretty and cute,
But she had boyfriends before.
One boyfriend.
Because she talks about going on this trip where they, was it to Provincetown?
Cuttyhunk.
No, it was Nantucket.
No, it was Cuttyhunk. In fact, we went there with, we took a boat there ourselves when we were in our 20s to Cuttyhunk.
You and I did? Okay, well, that's good to know.
Yeah, that's a wonderful journal in her notebook.
But she didn't keep people at a distance.
No, she loved
She had a
people.
gift for bringing people in, whereas she could have, given her background, she could have been very forbidding and keep away, but that wasn't the vibration.
No. I mean, she had a problem with alcohol. Many people on her father's side had to have alcohol problems, and on her mother's side, her uncle in the country was also alcoholic. So that was really an overwhelming problem for her. And I mean, she didn't drink all the time, but just when she started, she couldn't stop. And why am I talking about that? Oh, because that made her relationships quite hard too, because you had to cope with that aspect of being fearful about her health. And
I'm sorry, we've been a long time waiting to hear about the first poem.
Well, you have to be patient. You have to be patient.
I think you're absolutely right.
No, he's wrong, and he has to be patient.
Okay, so this poem is set in Nova Scotia, and her mother has been hospitalized, and she is in the kitchen with her grandmother. And it's a Sestina. You know, it's a complex French form with a interesting rhyme scheme. It's got 6 stanzas of 6 lines each, and a 3-line envoy at the end. And the end words of the first stanza, you can see, are repeated in a different order as end words in all the subsequent stanzas. But it's, do you want to read it, Foster?
Right. I have to take my glasses off. September rain falls on the house. In the falling light, the old grandmother sits in the kitchen with the child beside the little Marvel stove, reading the jokes from the almanac, laughing and talking to hide her tears. She thinks that her equinoctial, is that right? Equinoctial tears and the rain that beats on the roof of the house were both foretold by the almanac, but only known to a grandmother. The iron kettle sings on the stove. She cuts some bread and says to the child, "It's time for tea now." But the child is watching the tea kettle's small, hard tears dance like mad on the hot black stove, the way the rain must dance on the house. Tidying up, the old grandmother hangs up the clever almanac. On its string, bird-like, the almanac hovers half open above the child, hovers above the old grandmother and her teacup full of dark brown tears. She shivers and says she thinks the house feels chilly and puts more wood in the stove. "It was to be," says the Marvel stove. "I know what I know," says the almanac. With crayons, the child draws a rigid house and a winding pathway. Then the child puts in a man with buttons like tears and shows it proudly to the grandmother. But secretly, while the grandmother busies herself above the stove, the little moons fall down like tears from between the pages of the almanac into the flower bed the child has carefully placed in the front of the house. "Time to plant tears," says the almanac. The grandmother sings to the marvelous stove, and the child draws another inscrutable house.
So that's very good, Foster. I thought that was great.
It's so simple, isn't it? The language is so simple.
And it's so unified. You know, the almanac and the stove and dancing on the stove like hot, dance like the hard tears are dancing like mad on the hot black stove. And then the little moons are falling from the almanac, and that incredible turn at the end, time to plant tears.
But you know, when she says, tidying up, the old grandmother hangs up the clever almanac on its string. You see that so perfectly. But you don't just see that, you see the sort of barrenness in that you feel that in that room.
And the presence of the two of them, I think.
But isn't it from the child's perspective?
Yeah,
Totally.
We're seeing it from the little girl's
Totally.
point of view.
yeah.
To survive, she had to be extraordinarily observant, I would think.
Yes, and that is the most spoken of thing with respect to Bishop, is how observant she is. And she always felt that well, Darwin was one of her favorite writers and an absolute North Star for her because of his capacity for observation and his discipline, and accuracy was one of her goals with her poetry was accuracy, but to retain the mystery too.
I mean, when she writes, she shivers and says she thinks the house feels chilly and puts more wood in the stove. That simple sentence gives you the aloneness and how she's trying to cope and stay warm and stay alive, basically.
Yeah. Another poet who manages this glimpse of childhood is Seamus Heaney in his elegies to his mother. When she died, he wrote a sequence of 10 or 12 sonnets called Clearances. And one is about, while all the others were away at Mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes. And another one is about folding the sheets, taking the sheets off the line. And it has that close-up quality that you're talking about, and the palpable difference of scale of the adult and the child.
But also, this has the feeling of, it conjures up to me that she's stuck there, and she's just there. It's that she can't articulate, she can't get herself out. Not that she's trying to, but she is stuck there.
Yeah. And also, it's been a scene of tremendous tragedy, because her mother, at one point, in the middle of the night, her mother would begin to scream, and then everybody would run around, all of her aunts and her grandmother and grandfather would run around and say, well, be careful of the child, and let's be quiet, and calm down, Gertrude, and so she was haunted by that.
You can feel the trauma in the room.
Absolutely,
you can feel
yes.
it in her description.
Okay, so let's go to this, oops, sorry. Here we go. All right, Foster, you're up.
No,
Foster's the radio voice.
No, Alice, you read this one.
I love this poem. It's practically my favorite poem, and she wrote it in 1960, so she'd been in Brazil for 10 years, and I think the invocation of the lushness and the beauty and the comfort of the place where they live in the country. She wasn't that fond of Rio, but she loved the country house. And in the middle of the poem, there's kind of an ineluctable pivot to a sense of foreboding, and I think you'll see it. So a good thing to hear are how musical it is. She calls it Song for the Rainy Season, and it's all the vowel work that is going on. Suddenly there's a string of O's, and suddenly there's a string of A's, and then suddenly there's 4 alliterative lines with F, and it's just very musical. So it begins, hidden, oh hidden in the high fog, the house we live in. Rain, rainbow ridden, where beneath the magnetic rock, where blood-black bromelias, lichens, and the lint, owls, and the lint of, I'm going to start again. Hidden, oh hidden in the high fog, the house we live in, beneath the magnetic rock. Rain, rainbow ridden, where blood-black bromelias, lichens, owls, and the lint of the waterfalls cling, familiar, unbidden. In a dim age of water, the brook sings loud from a rib cage of giant fern. Vapor climbs up the thick growth effortlessly, turns back, holding them both, house and rock, in a private cloud. At night on the roof, blind drops crawl, and the ordinary brown owl gives us proof he can count. 5 times, always 5. He stamps and takes off after the fat frogs that, shrilling for love, clamor and mount. House, open house, to the white dew and the milk-white sunrise, kind to the eyes, to membership of silverfish, mouse, bookworms, big moths, with a wall for the mildew's ignorant map, darkened and tarnished by the warm touch of the warm breath, immaculate, cherished, rejoice, for a later era will differ. O difference that kills or intimidates much of all our small, shadowy life. Without water, the great rock will stare, unmagnetized, bare, no longer wearing rainbows or rain. The forgiving air and the high fog gone. The owls will move on, and the several waterfalls shrivel in the steady sun. Oh, you know that turn where she goes, oh, difference that kills or intimidates much of all our small, shadowy life.
I underlined that, I underlined.
So beautiful.
What was the event that caused the change?
I think it's just prescience about the catastrophes that can await you in life and how suddenly things can change. I think she was still very happy with Lota in 1960, so I don't think, but she may have sensed that it wouldn't last forever, and it didn't.
Question, comment. On the word immaculate, I've never heard it before.
I know.
I'm a fairly good reader. I mean, I read a lot, but I know immaculate. Everyone knows immaculate, but I've never heard immaculate in any form.
I know. I don't think I have either. And the words that precede it have such a drumbeat, darkened and tarnished by the warm touch of the warm breath. I mean, it's gathering force. And then immaculate comes, it's so crisp. And you turn around and say, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, it means that, you know, there's bookworms and there's an ignorant map made from the mildew, and there's silverfish, and there's a lot of teeming life that's kind of corrosive, but
When she says fat frogs that shrilling for love, clamor and mount.
5 times, always 5, yeah. That was her favorite number, and then towards the end, you know, the several waterfalls will shrivel in the steady sun. I sometimes think that English poetry would be absolutely impoverished without the letter S. It's just amazing, and she uses it so richly, and her rhyme is so musical. It's like she in one of her college papers, she was writing from the Vassar library, and I was amazed she didn't identify the birds because they were kind of obviously Canada geese. But she starts her essay by saying, you know, I was sitting in the carrel at the Vassar library, digging into my own thoughts, like the Count of Monte Cristo, scratching and scratching. And suddenly I overheard the birds. And she goes to the window and she sees the geese going ahead, and then, you know how they are. They realign, and you know, and she said she's staring at the spaces between the birds, and she's comparing that to the stops of rest in music. And suddenly you have this perfect image, and she says, and what it's accomplishing is the migration. So that's she's got the large concept, the migration. She's got the musical spaces between the birds. She played the clavichord and was a really good musician.
Well, so that goes back to the clay pigeons and the timing.
Yeah, it does, exactly. Yeah, and to her observation and how metaphoric she was, and how studious she was, how thoughtful. I mean, she was really driven by big ideas, but not handled in a grandiose way. She always preferred the modest artist, Clay and Webern and Those were the people
She was a painter, it's important to say.
a lovely painter, really.
Thought of herself as a painter. You know, I just want to stop for 1 minute to say, because we haven't done this before, but if people have comments that they want to talk about the poems, please speak up.
Well, also, we have some poets in the audience.
Okay, so let's go on to one art.
Well, this is probably her most famous poem. Wouldn't you say, Liz? Yeah.
And it says so much about her and her life, doesn't it?
Why don't you read it, Alice?
Well, she had lost her partner, Lota, who had a series of nervous breakdowns because the amazing park that she had built, designed, and worked on for many years. Is that me? No. The man, her patron, had lost his power, and she was just so distressed that this park for the people, this central park by the sea that she had cared about so much, was that's the park. And it had a bandstand and had a children's library, and she designed the street lamps that were 45 feet tall and the largest in the world at that time. And she was really capable and had fantastic taste. But she had these series of nervous breakdowns, and her psychiatrist recommended that Bishop leave for a while. And Bishop came back to New York, and Lota couldn't stand the separation. And she came to see her, and she overdosed on the night of her arrival. So Lota is a big part of the undercurrent, underbelly, reality of this poem. But the occasion, the immediate occasion for this poem, which is about the art of losing, is her love for a younger woman whom she met at Harvard, and they were together for 9 years. They had a really wonderful relationship. But about 5 years into the relationship, Alice had a proposal of marriage by Michael Harrington, the historian, and she was tempted. And Bishop was absolutely devastated and frightened. And so the immediate occasion is the loss of Alice.
How old is she when how old?
Alice,
No, how old is Elizabeth Bishop when she writes this poem?
it was written in 75, so she was 64. But I just want to read one tiny thing, a few lines. Let's see. And she started to write a poem about Lota, an elegy to Lota, in 67 when Lota died. And she left some notes about it. And I want to read a few of them because you'll see then the allusions to Lota in this poem that is also about Alice. The elegy poem, make it in sections, some anecdotal, some lyrical, different lengths, never more than 2 short pages. Your style, your elegancies, love of order, reticence and pride, the understandable snobbery and superiority, the temper and the difference, heroism, brave and young, the heroic appearance at the yacht club, because Lota was a very she was obviously a gay woman, and her family was very upset about it. She was the black sheep. Convents, sadnesses, groans and howls when injured, small hands, small feet, the Beardsley silhouette, the Pierrot costume, the English underwear, and little socks, the First Communion, the chip on the shoulder, the books, atheism, pride, pride, pride. Oh, so touching. And so this is, she wrote that in 67, and this is 1975, so 9 years later. And it's a villanelle. I won't go into the rhyme scheme, but another complex French rhyme scheme that really has its roots in the songs that the French people sang, and the repetitions when they were binding wheat, gathering and binding wheat. And so anyway, the art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day, except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch. And look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones and vaster, some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, the gesture I love. I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. So that parentheses in the bottom, write it, and the italic is, the drafts of this poem survive, and she was working up to that, and she didn't arrive at it until the very last draft. But she had always loved a poem of Hopkins.
What does that mean, that writing?
Well, I think that, she's basically,
To describe it?
yeah, she's saying, I'm so good at losing. I can give you a lesson in it. But the heart of that is the loss and the feeling and the abyss. And I think she's acknowledging that at the end, that it's not too hard to master, though it may look like disaster. She's saying that's how it feels now. And when she was young and writing about Hopkins, she really admired a parenthesis in one of his poems. She loved his poems because she felt that he finished them when they were still pretty raw. He didn't overwork his poems. And her feeling was that the strength of an idea and the magnetism of an idea is not separate from the ardor in which somebody's trying to communicate it. There's their excitement about it. And in the middle of a poem Hopkins was writing, he wrote, "Fancy, come faster." He just wanted the words and the...
But she's talking to herself and sharing it with us. When I first read this, I was startled by that parenthesis. Was I supposed to be?
Why?
That unexpected.
Yeah.
Very unexpected. It seems to break the rhythm of the poem, but calls so much attention to the end of it. But I was startled. It was almost like a bit of prose and poetry.
But she brings herself into the poem so immediately at that moment, and it's a shift.
But I think she's talking to herself. Use it. Use it.
Admit it.
Pardon me?
Admit it. Yeah.
Admit it is
I think that's absolutely right. Admit it, because she was torn apart when she was writing this. And afterwards, she said to Catherine White, she wrote her a letter, and Catherine White was an editor, wonderful editor at the New Yorker, and she was up in Maine for the summer. And Bishop said, everybody seems to like it. I guess it's a real tearjerker. She was a little shy about it because it's such an open poem, really.
But I'm interested to hear that the write it came later in the evolution of the poem.
Yeah.
It didn't come to her at first.
Yeah. I wonder if I have some of the other, let me see if I can find some of the other choices. Well, in the first one, the first draft, it ends, a good piece of one continent and another continent, the whole damn thing. He who loses his life, etc., but he who loses his love, no, no, never, never, never again. I mean, the notes are very raw and moving. Now I'm looking at her handwriting, which is really hard. Anyway, she did try out other endings.
Okay, we're going to move along because we only have a few minutes.
Oh, yeah. So here is, did we have that picture of, oh, at the end, we'll have a picture of her taken by Alice.
Is that it?
No, that's Key West, that's it. So that's what she looked like, you know, towards the end of her life in her 60s. And she and Alice, as I mentioned, were together for 10 years. Alice was a secretary at Kirkland House at Harvard, and that's where Bishop was teaching.
Was she a good teacher?
She hated teaching, and she didn't think she was very good at it. But a lot of the students learned a lot from her because the comments that she made, I mean, and the modesty and the reality of, I mean, James Merrill said she was so good at a lifelong impersonation of an ordinary woman.
Exactly. But I mean, he didn't have to sort of snap her neck off to make a nice comment.
People knew that she was a genius. I mean, she was evidently a genius, and
But she was both.
she was, yeah.
Okay.
And she identified with this figure of the Sandpiper, and when she got a great award, the Neustadt Award, towards the end of her life, when she was accepting it, she said, I guess I have been all my life like that little sandpiper, pecking along the edge of the sea and the edges of continents, looking for something, 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 you know, like Darwin, looking. So this is North Haven, Maine, where she and Alice summered for 5 or 6 years. They had a beautiful farm called the Sabine Farm, and she wrote her beautiful elegy to Robert Lowell there, called North Haven. Do you want to read this one?
Go ahead.
No? Okay. Sandpiper. The roaring alongside he takes for granted, and that every so often the world is bound to shake. He runs to the south, finical, awkward, in a state of controlled panic, a student of Blake. Now that refers to see the world in a blade of grass, and heaven in a wild flower, to hold eternity in the palm of your hand, and infinity. It's that Blake reference. The roaring alongside he takes for granted, and that every so often the world is bound to shake. He runs to the south, finical, awkward, in a state of controlled panic, a student of Blake. The beach hisses like fat. On his left, a sheet of interrupting water comes and goes and glazes over his dark and brittle feet. He runs straight through it, watching his toes. Watching, rather, the spaces of sand between them, where, no detail too small, the Atlantic drains rapidly backwards and downwards. As he runs, he stares at the dragging grains. The world is a mist, and then the world is minute and vast and clear. The tide is higher or lower. He couldn't tell you which. His beak is focused, he is preoccupied, looking for something. Poor bird, he is obsessed. The millions of grains are black, white, tan, and gray, mixed with quartz grains, rose, and amethyst. So Vic, that metaphor, that the spaces of sand between them, See, you know, she was, when she came up with a metaphor, it entered her bloodstream. And that trip to Cuttyhunk she took with her only boyfriend in 1934, July of 1934, she records in her notebook, Robert says that the beach hisses like fat. And as the tide comes in, he compares it to the sound of shoveling snow. So she heard these things. That was 1934, and she wrote this in 62. She didn't forget it.
But hissing is so vivid.
Yeah.
Hissing.
Well, hissing, it's also the water on the stove.
Yeah.
It's the same.
So that's
You
where
know,
we-
I underlined, the world is a mist.
Yeah.
And then the world is minute and vast and clear. And that, it's this, it goes back to, you know, the almanac hanging on the string, because it's vast, but it's minute.
Yeah.
You have that feeling of her as a little girl, that the world is overwhelming, but it's minute in that moment.
I think that's true, and it brings us, it brings us close to his beak, you know, his focused beak, just as the child looking up.
So these are some quotes that I put together that give you a sense of bishop on bishop. And this is a quote from Clement Greenberg that I thought was perfect.
You felt with Elizabeth, life came first. Everybody said that about her. And that's why she didn't panic about finishing a poem. It took 27 years from the inception of The Moose until she finished it as the Phi Beta Kappa poem at Harvard in 1970-something. She didn't pressure herself.
I love when he says that she wasn't a yakking literary type all the time. She wasn't Delmore Schwartz. I mean, that's perfect.
Yeah.
You know, Alice, doesn't that picture look like a Laurie Cohen picture?
Yeah, it does. It does. She wasn't very happy at that moment. That was in Key West in the late 30s. You know, also, to speak to this humility that she really did have, although she was very clear about her artistic ideals and her work, and she was really clear about the quality of her work. And she held her own with Marianne Moore as a young college student, corresponding with her. And
But they were at Vassar together.
no, she met her just after Vassar. But for instance, she said, you know, it's not really that complicated writing a poem. It's like making a map. Eventually, the pieces fit together.
Let's thank Alice for a fabulous evening.
When can we expect your wonderful book?
Well, I hope to turn the manuscript in January, February of this year. So, yeah. And thank you for your verb, admit, because I think that was key.
And we're going to have Alice back for a third visit one day very soon, and we'll have a big surprise about what we're going to talk about.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you all for coming, and happy holidays.